Now in the part 3 of this perturbation theory lecture, we'll do the example of constant perturbation in great detail, and we'll see what are the subtle features of this which can emerge by applying this kind of perturbation theory. So let's consider the problem where, as you can see in this diagram, that one can turn on the potential Vt at time t equal to 0 and keep it on. So see what happens when you do that. So the V is switched on at time 0 and it is kept on for a long time t, let's say. So what will be the first correction, the CF1 at the time dependence of CF1? We use the formula we derive. So just by applying the formula derived, we obtain this form. Just 3 lines of algebra, you can check it. We get this form minus I by h bar VIF, which is the transition amplitude from I0 to F0, e to the power I omega IF t by 2. I'm dropping the subscripts of naught. 2 sine omega IF t by 2 divided by omega IF. So what is the transition probability? Just square it. We get this formula. And notice what do we learn from this. So the probability depends on the matrix element of perturbation BIF, which means it tells you that how much overlap the matrix element of BIF causes between the states I0 and F0, and it is depending on that, proportional to that. And it depends on the frequency difference between the two states. That gives you this. This is a harmonic form. It's an oscillatory function, and there is also the omega IF comes at the denominator. It depends on that, which is the frequency difference. And if you plot this form has a maxima or a peak somewhere. So that tells you the maximum transition probability comes from the states which has the exactly same energy, which means omega IF tends to 0. So this function has a peak there. So the perturbation is more likely to neither add or subtract energy, which is what you expect in a classical transition. But a quantum transition actually allows all these possibilities, keeping the highest probability for the classical, but the other probabilities are not 0 either. So if I plot this function, this looks like this, a peak at center, and then there are small peaks at certain intervals, periodic intervals, and the difference between these two peaks is very high. Like if the big peak is like a 1, this next smaller peak is like 0.05, it is that high. So if I plot the omega IF as a continuous variable omega, this is how the plot looks like, and we can see the probability amplitude for transferring of transition from I to F as a function of the frequency difference between the initial state and the final state. So this is how it looks like. Now the central peak is at omega IF equal to 0, which tells you the highest probability is to have a transition where the final state has the exactly same energy as the initial state. It has a width 4 pi by t and the height is t square, and that tells you that as the time passes, then this height gets bigger and the width gets smaller, or the probability increases to go to it, the transition to happen in a state, or the probability doesn't increase, rather say the probability of having a transition into a state which is not of same energy at the initial state reduces as the time gets longer, as you wait longer. And similarly, you will see an appreciable transition from initial state to final state which lies only within the limit of omega IF between 2 pi by t plus 2 pi by t and minus 2 pi by t. So we'll emphasis on this point further at some later stage, but let's look at what happens at the t going to infinity limit. So if I take the t going to infinity limit, the sine square xt divided by x square t, it becomes a delta function, but the delta function has the function form is omega t by 2, and I obtain this formula by from here I can write it down as 2 pi h bar delta h bar omega IF by using this formula, and then the transition probability after a long time becomes this, which is basically, what does it mean by that? What does it mean physically by that? That as you wait longer and longer, and like t going to infinity, the only probability which will be non-zero is the probability which takes you from an initial state to a final state which has the exactly same energy. Now, how to make sense of this limit, and that you can see from this plot, because it has a peak at the origin, and the peak gets narrower and narrower as the time passes, and it eventually becomes a delta function. And it at any finite time, you always have a finite probability to find the system in another state which is not energy conserving. So that is basically the quantum mechanical result of transition probability. Now, how to make sense of this result? What is happening here? So if you call delta t as the time interval for which the perturbation is on, a transition with appreciable probability will happen only if it satisfies the energy gap, satisfies the time energy uncertainty. It is like an uncertainty, but it is not exactly an uncertainty in the sense. I am calling it uncertainty, but it's not uncertainty in the true sense, because in uncertainties delta t and delta e are basically operators. Here they are not operators; they are observables. I mean, and they are basically the parameters. Sorry, they are not operators or observable. They are basically parameters. It is basically the time, and these are numbers. Basically, they are not operators. So in this the probability is finite for an appreciable time. An appreciable probability will appear only if the time interval satisfies with the energy change this relation. So so that is what basically this formula tells us. This forms tells us. So now and this looks like you can interpret it as like uncertainty principle, but not strictly. Now, if the delta t is super small, let's see what happens when the delta t is super small. Then we can have a broader peak, which means more and more energy non-conservation, and vice versa. When delta t is, you wait longer, then you have a smaller peak with no non-conservation. So that is basically the interpretation of this form. And in our case, we estimate the t by this. The t satisfies this kind of relationship, analogous to the energy time uncertainty. So, but what happens in practice? What is the probability actually in a physical system that you detect a transition which is not satisfying energy conservation? So in practice, the evolutionary time t is imposed by the experimental setup, and that is basically tells you how long is long enough. When you say we have to wait for a long time, whenever you say this kind of statement, a long time or short time, you have to say how long is long enough and how short is short enough, and that comes from this constants of the energy, other scales of the problem, and the experimental setup. So now, if we want to, here are some number estimate. So if you want to detect a non-conservation of energy, a state transition which doesn't conserve energy, and that the detection probability you want to be like 1 by 10⁶ for photons in the visible time of the spectrum, you can estimate that the time it requires is 10⁻⁹ second. So that is the long short time scale. If you wait longer, if your experiment probe is longer, then you won't see any only transitions you will observe are basically energy conserving transitions. So you can imagine that practically you don't have that kind of short time measurements. You usually do even like order of millisecond or second order measurement, but there are some very modern experimental techniques where you can do this ultra fast spectroscopy. So people do this ultra fast spectroscopy, which is attosecond pulse laser or some picosecond pulse laser. So there you can actually look at things in these kind of time scales, and you can actually detect non-conservation of energy. But in a normal visible light, the regular spectroscopy, you do almost any typical experiment you have done till now in lab, or most likely going to do in lab in your entire master degree, it will not appear to you will not be able to see any transition which is of this kind of time scale, which will violate the energy conservation. So here is a more elaborate discussion on this point. So in a typical experiment in which atoms are excited in a discharge tube, we don't even know when the atoms were actually excited, to forget about even this position. We are nowhere close to this position. So neither interrupting the time evolution of the system in a time period. So however, such interruption can happen naturally when the atom actually collides with another atom and it is de-excited. So that comes from the mean free path, or the time scale of the mean free path of the problem. So then that naturally shortens the evolution time of the system, and that leads to an energy spread delta E in the photons. And this thing is called a collision broadening. So this can be estimated and observed. So in a typical experiment, you can estimate what is the delta E spread you will see, and that is, we have estimated that if the time scale is like 10 to the minus 9 second, the broadening is like 10 to the minus 6. But if we neglect any collision effect, then the T can be infinity, then there will be no broadening. But in practice, you will always see a broadening, and that gives you an estimate of the mean free path time scale. So now let's come back to the question which we originally left out in the previous part. We just discussed that how the transition happens when there is a, just a moment. So now we will return to a question which we originally said has an extra complication, because we have only discussed so far the transition to a state which is different from the initial state. Now we want to ask, what is the probability that the system stays at the same energy state, and which is basically the probability that system doesn't go to any other state, or it stays at a state which is degenerate at exactly same energy. So we will see there is some complication, and we will try to understand the details of this. So let us say your final state EF is same as EI. So what happens when you plug in the formula and blindly calculate it? You will find this equation 22, but the probability of going from I to F is given by 1 by h bar square BFI square T square, which is the peculiar part, and we'll see why. So it is like saying that with time, the probability of the system stays at its original state increases like it's a quadratic in time. A quadratic in time of something is of a probability amplitude is very weird. You can expect something to be linear in time, but quadratic in times it is a diverging quantity with higher time. So how to deal with that? How to deal with this problem? So this formula makes sense at a very short time. So let's say the EF, if EF is not equal to EI, everything is fine, but if equal to EI, and it is actually also valid if the EF is not strictly equal to EI, because then you will find a finite probability amplitude, but this prefactor will be there. So in a very short time limit, you will see that the probability of going I to F to T square still makes sense, and that can be tested in this limit when the PIF is much smaller than 1, and it's true in a very short time limit. But what is the probability? So this how to make sense of this counterintuitive formula at a large time limit? So it turns out that in a realistic situation, usually there is not like one state. So when we do this harmonic oscillator problem, it's the textbook problems, when the final state is just one state. But in a practical system, usually the final state is not a single state, because you never work with a single isolated harmonic oscillator. You work with a group of harmonic oscillator, usually whose frequencies are somewhat nearby, or some temperature effect is there. So usually transition happens from a state, usually also a group of states, to a final state, which is also another group of states, which have the nearly same energy at the initial state. So to compute the correct probability amplitude, which you can actually measure, so first of all, this formula is correct, but it is peculiar, and unlikely that you are about to observe that in a practical problem. So let's see what you are likely to observe in a practical problem. So in a practical problem, you have to estimate the final state not by a single state, but by a group of states, so which has nearby energy to the final states of which you are going to estimate at, and that can form a continuum of energy spectrum near EI. So this is a typical scenario in a practical system, and the resolution of the energy also gives you that how close you can be into the final state. So here is an example of that problem. Let's say the initial state is a discrete spectrum of a problem, and the final state is a part of continuum. When does that happen? It happens in a ionization or radioactive problem, where the initial state is any of the discrete bound state of the problem of the system. You can imagine, let's say, the atom as some kind of a spherical well, or a square well, which is a bounded region and the states are discrete. But the final state is a decay. The atom have decayed and it became a free electron, a momentum eigenstate which is part of a continuum. So that's a very natural scenario, and one can show that when you do the integral over the final state on the final possible energies, and the result will give you a transition probability which is proportional to t, linear in t, not quadratic in t anymore. So we need a blurring factor. It's like a fudge factor which is in front of the final state. As the transition to take place, there have to be a number of states existing where the transition can happen, can be allowed, and that adds to this, gives us this blurring factor, and we will see that how it leads to how it solves this quadratic time problem. So let's assume that the system is not going to transition from an initial state I to a final state F, but rather from initial state I to a final group of states which are nearby energy, and that group of the energy, that factor of a group of state at energy has to be taken by summing over all the possible states which are almost same energy. So here I write this in this equation, where we have this sum over all the states where the system can go, and that is given by, that can be converted into an integral if it is a continuum or almost quasi-continuum, and write it as a density of states. So you are probably familiar with this concept called density of states, which tells you number of states in energy interval d, and one can replace this sum by rho e dE with the factor whatever you want to calculate. So as an exercise, do this problem I have given in the side. You can find it in any standard textbook of Beiser or any basic textbook. So take a 2D or 3D square box and estimate the number of states in between E to E plus dE. You know all the formulas. Just compute the differentiate it and compute the dE, and then you can estimate the number of states which you can expect between E to E plus dE. So now how the formula changes for this transition probability? The formula changes like that now your P, the probability amplitude from going I to F at time t, had to be summed over these F's which are possible, and that is forms a continuum. So you replace that by this integral, like this formula. So this becomes this probability amplitude of going from I to F integrated over rho EF dEF. So now you plug in all the formulas you have derived so far, and you can see that if the EF minus EI, so there is a EF minus EI square in the denominator, when the energy gap between the initial state and the final state increases a lot, then this PIF gets suppressed quadratically. So that's an observation for this equation. But this equation 23 is an important formula which we derive, and we will see that how to further refine this formula and get some numbers out of that. So let's consider that also observe the fact that this integrand also blows up, or it doesn't blow up but has a maxima when the EI and EF are very close in energy. So it retains the original thing which we learned, that the probability amplitude is highest for a energy conserving transition, when the transition has same energy at initial at final state. So at t equal to infinity, we can again use the same limit formula and show that it becomes a delta function. So at t equal to infinity, this is how your integral look like, and you can see it is proportional to t with a factor of the density of state at final energy and the transition amplitude factor. So now that problem looks better, that with time now the transition probability is proportional to t, and the average of Vf square appears outside the integral sign, and this average is done over, this is a quantum expectation value, and then there is a classical averaging which is over the final states or the range of final states. Now this is a consequence of the fact that the total transition probability is proportional to the area of the curve. So that's why you get this if the height is t square, the width is t, that's why this 1 by t factor, this t proportional t factor makes sense in this way. So the important quantities are, now there is another important quantity which we can estimate from this formula, because we want to know, often ask this question, that what is the transition rate from initial state to final state, which in other words, what is the number of states or the probability of the states to go from initial state I to f in each unit of time. To know that, you have to take a derivative with respect to time, and you can see that since it is proportional to t, it becomes a constant, and in large time of course, because we have estimated this thing whole to be in the large time limit. So when we compute this, so W, I call W as the transition rate. So W from I to f, so I write down the f in a square bracket to remember ourselves that the f is not a single state but a bunch of states which are quasi-continuum. So that becomes 2 pi by h bar BFI square, where BFI is an quantum expectation value, and when I do take the square and do averaging, that is over this classical average over the final states, times the rho EF, which is the density of state at the final energy F, and of course because the delta function tells you that the EF is almost equal to EI, that's where the probability is highest. So it is for a group of state F whose energy is almost close to EI, that's when the probability is appreciable. So this formula is called Fermi-Golden rule. It was first derived by Fermi, and it solved a lot of spectroscopic problems of that time, around 1930 or so. And it was just the name Golden is nothing specific. The Golden name was given as a, because this formula was very useful in describing many systems, so it was just given as a cute name, and the name stuck. So this is the Fermi-Golden rule formula, which is widely used across any time dependent quantum mechanical problem, and this is the most important formula probability of this chapter. Okay, so now let's start with the Fermi-Golden rule and understand a little bit more about it. Just look at it from different side. So this is an alternate form of the Fermi-Golden rule. You will find in some other book, where you estimate that the integrator, it is already integrated with this DEF rho EF. So sometimes the Fermi-Golden rule is written as this form. So it is basically the same thing. It gives the rate of transition in terms of probability amplitudes for the system to go from I to F. Now, as I said before, that in BFI square average, the final states form a quasi-continuum, and the BFI will be similar to F, and all BFI would be similar to F if they are similar. So here is an example which is for, we'll study this example in detail in next chapter. It's the elastic scattering example. Elastic scattering means the energy is conserved, so the energy in initial state and final states are anyway same. So you can look at this problem like that. So some particle is coming like that in a scatterer, which is some potential, and then it is scattered off in different direction. It could be in different direction, but the energy remains same. So we would like to normally estimate the probability amplitude for this kind of systems. We will do this problem in great detail in the next chapter. So now let's continue to discuss on this problem, or this constant time dependent perturbation problem, and discuss the effect of higher order terms. So far we have only discussed the first order term. So what happens when you add a higher order term? So let's say the probability amplitude T, this is the first order term which we have estimated. Now let's look at the second order term. So the second order term looks like this, which we have derived this formula. For constant perturbation it will look like this, and because it's a constant perturbation, I can simply go from this to this when I simplify this algebra. And if you notice, if you try to make a physical sense of this formula, you can see that the first term is exactly same as the time dependent perturbation theory. It is this term, it is nothing but this form which we got already. The only additional thing is this second term, which is additive term. So you can look at this page 34 if you forgot that how the first order term looks like, and notice that there is a small notation change. There I wrote sometimes this omega if, but here I am writing omega fi. Both are same thing. It basically tells you the energy difference between initial and the final state. So now, because of the similarity of the first term has the similarity with the first order perturbation theory, the time dependent part has similarity as the first order perturbation theory, we could have had the same interpretation as the time going to infinity, how the time dependence of this problem behaves when you go to t equal to infinity. That is exactly the same as what we discussed within the first order time dependent perturbation theory. That means the only important contribution will come from EF, which is almost close to EI. But here that is not the case, because you have a second term and that will change a lot of things about this problem. So let's discuss the role of the second term. So what does the second term do? The second term creates an intermediate energy, gives a transition to an intermediate energy, and that if that EM differs from EF and EI both, then the second term will give a rapid oscillation, because if it's same, it is of course the oscillatory part will die, but if it is different, it will give a more and more different, it will give more and more oscillating character. So that will not grow in the transition probability that grows with t, linearly in t, because when you average, this oscillating part will not contribute. So together, the transition formula with first order and second order term, the Fermi-Golden rule formula, will look like this. So let's interpret this formula. So the interpretation is following, that the transition due to second order, and that interpretation is already something familiar to you, because we have already gone through it when we did the Dyson series. So here is the interpretation here for this formula. It's very similar to what we did previously, but just in the context of this form. So the transition due to second order term takes place in two steps. As we learned that the second order will have this intermediate step. The first I takes you to the energy non-conserving transition to N, and then this is called a virtual transition, because it is energy non-conserving and it is entirely quantum. There is no classical analog for it. And then it goes from N to I, and there is again no energy conservation in this range. And as I said, this because there is no energy conservation, these things are called virtual transitions. In contrast, in the first order transition, there is no room for this kind of virtual transition. Their probabilities are very low, but there they can have a significant contribution. So in this case, they are like real transitions in first order transition only, and in second order transition you get a virtual transition between two, which takes you from in a virtual intermediate steps, and then it takes you to the real state. So here is a diagrammatic representation of this idea. So the first order transition takes you from I to F, where EI is almost equal to EF. A second order transition takes you to an intermediate state M and all the possible intermediate states M, which are not necessarily equal to EI. There are all kind of intermediate possibilities, and then it takes you to a state F. So that is what this second order term implies. And these EI and EF are almost equal, but that requirement comes from the first order transition, but there is no such requirement for the second order transition. That's why these are called virtual transition. But that doesn't mean that the virtual transition cannot have an equal amplitude. So what happens when EM is equal to EI, almost equal to EI? You will run in trouble with this formula, because now this formula have not accounted for this scenario, that the intermediate state can be equal to the initial state. So in the third part of this lecture, we will see how to deal with the scenario. So that's where we will stop this part. How to deal with this scenario where the EM, the intermediate state, because the intermediate state can have all possible energies. What if the intermediate state has the energy equal to EI or EF? and the transition amplitude is not 0. So in that case, this formula has the denominator goes to 0 and it blows up. How to deal with this kind of singularities? We will learn how to regularize this singularity mathematically, and that will be the subject of the third part of this talk. So in the context of first order perturbation theory, actually this is also a relevant question, because we have conserved it so far. The time dependence of CFT when f not equal to y. So now this CIT we'll see what happens when you do this CIT. Basically, when you have a blowing up expression or a denominator which is going to 0, how to deal with that kind of scenario, we will learn that in the third part.